Welcome to Once Upon a Dream, your haven for soothing bedtime stories that bring calm and magic to your nights. If you found calm or joy in our stories and would like to support the channel, buying us a virtual coffee is a wonderful way to keep this dream alive. Thank you for being part of this journey. Your support means the world to us. Good evening. My name is Ben, and I'll be your guide tonight as we journey together into deep relaxation and restful sleep. Take a deep breath in through your nose, and as you exhale, feel the tension in your body begin to melt away. Allow your eyes to gently close and bring your attention to the soothing rhythm of your breath. With each inhale, invite calm and stillness into your body. And with each exhale, let go of any worries or thoughts from the day. Relaxing every muscle, every joint, and every cell. You are safe. You are calm. And you are ready to drift into a deep and restful sleep. Snuggle in and drift away, for we're about to wander into a story as warm as a fading ember. A romance born where dreams touch the past. This isn't just a tale to doze by. It's the glow of two hearts meeting beyond their years. One in a village of flickering lamps, the other beneath a sky of endless lights. Together we'll tread their shadowed path, where every sigh across the ages pulls them closer. Relax now, and let their distant voices guide you to sleep. Chapter 1. First Glimpses. Philadelphia, October 1918. Clara Montgomery's hands trembled as she removed her blood-stained apron. 16 hours on her feet, and the hospital corridor outside still overflowed with the sick and dying. The Spanish flu had descended upon Philadelphia like a biblical plague following the Liberty Loan Parade 3 weeks ago. And now the city was paying the price for its patriotic gathering. Dr. Montgomery. She turned to find Dr. Phillips leaning against the doorframe of the cramped supply room, his expression a mixture of condescension and fatigue. "I've just informed the hospital board about my modified treatment protocol for the respiratory cases," he said, straightening his tie. They were quite impressed. "Your protocol?" Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Those were my recommendations. The eucalyptus steam inhalation, the increased fluid administration—" "Come now," he interrupted with a dismissive wave. "The board would hardly implement experimental treatment suggested by a woman doctor, especially one barely 2 years out of medical college. I simply provided the professional credibility your ideas needed." Clara bit her tongue. This battle, like so many others, would have to wait. There were too many patients dying for her to waste energy fighting over recognition. "Of course," she said tightly. "How thoughtful of you." Phillips nodded, satisfied with her apparent submission. "You should get some rest. You look terrible, and we can't have you falling ill. Too few doctors as it is." After he left, Clara slammed her palm against the supply shelf, sending rolls of gauze tumbling to the floor. The unfairness of it burned worse than the ache in her feet and the hollowness in her stomach from skipped meals. Even amid a catastrophe that was claiming hundreds of lives daily, the hospital's male doctors couldn't see past her gender to acknowledge her contributions. By the time she reached her modest apartment 3 blocks from the hospital, exhaustion had replaced anger. Her landlady, Mrs. Winters, had left a covered plate outside her door, a kindness born of fear. As the older woman now avoided direct contact with Clara due to her work at the death house, as locals had taken to calling Pennsylvania Hospital. Clara managed a few bites of cold potato and stringy beef before collapsing fully clothed onto her bed. She should wash, should burn these clothes as a precaution, should review her case notes. But consciousness slipped away before she could act on any of these thoughts. The dream came immediately, and with startling clarity. She stood in a room filled with equipment she couldn't identify. Glass boxes with glowing screens, machines with blinking lights, surfaces of gleaming metal and strange transparent materials. A man worked with his back to her. His sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms marked with a distinctive mole shaped like a crescent moon. When he turned, she saw a face that seemed simultaneously foreign and achingly familiar. Angular features, eyes that reflected intelligence, and a determination she recognized in herself. He was clearly of Asian descent, but dressed in clothing unlike any she had seen. Simple, yet made of fabrics that moved differently than wool or cotton. The transmission vector isn't what they think, he said, his voice resonant and clear. It's droplets, primarily respiratory. The masks help, but they need to be worn properly. He gestured to a strange instrument that projected a magnified image on the wall. See how the virus particles hang in the air. Social distance of at least 6 feet is crucial. The words made sense individually, but their arrangement felt both alien and profound. Clara moved closer, drawn to the illuminated display. I'm close to modeling the mutation pattern, the man continued, unaware of her presence. If I can predict the shifts in the protein structure, we might develop a targeted approach instead of these shotgun interventions. Clara reached toward the display, her fingers passing through the projection of what appeared to be tiny spheres covered in spike-like protrusions. Something about their structure triggered a flash of intuition. It attacks the lungs directly, she whispered. That's why the cyanosis progresses so rapidly. The man froze, then slowly turned toward her voice. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Clara felt a jolt of recognition so powerful it was almost physical. Microbial particles, Clara gasped as she sat bolt upright in bed, the morning light streaming through her curtains. The dream clung to her consciousness with unusual persistence, fragments of knowledge swirling like debris in a flood. She scrambled for the journal she kept by her bedside and began writing feverishly, capturing terms and concepts that seemed to come from nowhere, yet felt undeniably true. Respiratory droplets, airborne transmission, virus mutation, protein structures, targeted intervention. These weren't words from her medical training, yet they resonated with absolute certainty. Clara had always had vivid dreams, but this was different. Less like imagination and more like remembering. An hour later, she hurried toward the hospital with her journal clutched to her chest. Something profound had shifted in her understanding overnight. When her colleague, Dr. Harrison, approached with a question about a patient with advancing cyanosis, Clara found herself suggesting an approach she couldn't recall learning. The virus targets hemoglobin in the blood cells directly, which is why oxygen isn't being properly transported, she explained. We need to focus on supporting the body's oxygenation while it fights the infection. If we position patients on their stomachs rather than their backs, it might improve lung expansion and drainage. Dr. Harrison stared at her. What medical journal published that theory? Clara hesitated. I've been synthesizing several sources. The lie came easily. Anything was better than admitting she had dreamed these insights. As the day progressed, Clara found herself implementing protocols that came instinctively, yet had no basis in her formal education. By evening, 3 critically ill patients had shown marginal improvement. Not a miracle, but in this nightmare of dying patients, even small victories mattered. When she finally returned to her apartment, Clara added detailed notes to her journal, trying to capture the fragments of knowledge that continued to surface in her mind. The man's face from her dream remained vivid. Those eyes that seemed to look into her with recognition. She attempted a sketch, though her artistic skills were limited. Who was he? Why did he feel so familiar? And how could a dream provide medical insights that actually worked? Clara fell asleep with these questions circling her mind, her fingers still clutching her pencil. Boston, present day. Your model is fundamentally flawed, Dr. Chen. Michael looked up from his computer to find Professor Whitmore standing in his office doorway, arms crossed over his tweed jacket. The older man stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. You can't predict viral mutation patterns with that degree of specificity, Whitmore continued. The evolutionary variables are too numerous. Michael suppressed a sigh. With respect, the algorithm uses historical pandemic data patterns to identify likely mutation trajectories. The Spanish flu of 1918 provides a particularly rich data set for comparing a modern influenza variant to a century-old pandemic is scientific overreach, Whitmore interrupted. The funding committee is concerned your research direction lacks practicality. My work could help us anticipate viral evolution instead of constantly playing catch-up, Michael said, struggling to keep frustration from his voice. If we had this modeling capability during COVID, but we didn't, and speculative modeling won't change that. The committee wants concrete applications, not theoretical frameworks. Whitmore glanced at the stacks of century-old medical journals scattered across Michael's desk. Perhaps less obsession with the past and more focus on current methodologies would serve your career better. After Whitmore left, Michael slumped in his chair, rubbing his temples. 6 years at Boston University's Department of Epidemiological Research, and he was still fighting the same battles against institutional inertia. His algorithms worked. they had successfully back-predicted 3 major influenza mutations. But the department remained skeptical of any approach that didn't follow conventional research methodologies. The screen before him displayed mortality statistics from Philadelphia during the peak of the 1918 pandemic. Grainy photographs showed overcrowded hospital wards, doctors in surgical masks, and the dead piled in hallways. Michael had been immersed in these archives for months, digitizing records and feeding the data into his predictive models. His eyes burned from staring at the screen too long. Just a few more entries, he promised himself. Then he'd head home. He typed in statistics from Pennsylvania Hospital, noting an anomalous decrease in mortality rates in one ward in late October 1918. Something worth investigating further. The next image in the archive was a photograph of medical staff. 5 doctors posed stiffly in white coats, faces solemn behind masks pulled down for the picture. His gaze was drawn to the only woman in the group, standing slightly apart. Her expression a mixture of determination and exhaustion. Michael found himself staring at her eyes, intelligent, challenging, somehow familiar. He didn't remember falling asleep at his desk. In his dream, he wandered through a hospital from another era. The sounds and smells assaulted his senses. Moaning patients, the sharp odor of disinfectant barely masking the stench of disease and death. Beds lined corridors, occupied by patients in various stages of cyanosis, their skin tinged blue from lack of oxygen. A woman moved among them with purpose, the female doctor from the photograph. Up close, he could see the strain on her face, the small scar above her right eyebrow, the intensity of her focus as she instructed nurses on patient positioning. Prone positioning improves oxygenation, she was saying. We'll rotate them every 2 hours and continue the steam inhalation treatments. Michael followed her, fascinated by the methodical way she worked, her decisive movements as she checked pulses and listened to lung sounds with a simple stethoscope. Her approaches were remarkably advanced for 1918. Some not documented in standard practice until decades later. She paused suddenly, looking around as if sensing his presence. "Hello?" she called softly. "Is someone there?" Michael froze as her gaze passed over him. For a heartbeat, her eyes seemed to lock with his. "I know you're there," she whispered. "I've seen your laboratory." Michael jerked awake, his heart pounding. The office was dark except for his computer screen. 3:28 a.m. He'd been asleep for hours, yet the dream remained vivid. He could still smell the carbolic acid they used as disinfectant. Still feel the weight of the woman doctor's gaze. He straightened, wincing at the stiffness in his neck, and found himself reaching for pen and paper. Almost compulsively, he began sketching the woman. The determined set of her jaw, those perceptive eyes, the small scar above her eyebrow that hadn't been visible in the archived photograph. The sketch complete, Michael stared at it in confusion. Why did she seem so familiar? Why could he recall details of her appearance that weren't in the historical record? His phone chimed with a text message. Jana from the lab. Still at work? Go home, workaholic. Michael sent a quick reply, then gathered his things. As he passed Jana's desk on the way out, she glanced up from her microscope. Rough day with Whitmore? She asked sympathetically. The usual. He thinks my research direction is speculative. Michael shrugged. Maybe he's right. He's not, Jana said firmly. Your modeling algorithms are ahead of their time. The old guard just doesn't get it yet. Michael smiled gratefully and was about to leave when Jana noticed his sketch. Who's this? Pointing at the sketch. She looks familiar. Just someone from the 1918 archives I'm digitizing, Michael said. Jana studied the drawing. She looks like that doctor in the Pennsylvania hospital staff photo. The female one who developed those advanced treatment protocols during the Spanish flu. Michael froze. There was an article about her in last month's medical history journal. Dr. Clara Montgomery, one of the few female physicians during that pandemic. She apparently saved an unusual number of patients by implementing techniques that weren't standard practice until decades later. Jana tilted her head. You've got a good eye for detail. You even included her birthmark. Birthmark? Michael's mouth went dry. Yeah, that little crescent-shaped mark on her wrist. It was mentioned in the article because it appears in her medical journals, too. She used it as part of her signature. I didn't realize you were an artist. I'm not, Michael said quietly, staring at the small crescent-shaped mark he'd unconsciously drawn on the woman's wrist. A detail that hadn't been visible in any photograph he'd seen. At home, Michael couldn't sleep. He paced his apartment, mind racing between scientific rationality and inexplicable knowing. He pulled up the digital archives he'd been working with, searching for any mention of Dr. Clara Montgomery. the search yielded more than expected. Clara Montgomery had been referenced in several papers about innovative pandemic responses. One account described her as mysteriously ahead of her time in understanding disease transmission. Michael found himself creating a new document, typing frantically as details from his dream resurfaced. Ward layouts, treatment approaches, conversations between staff. Information he couldn't possibly know from the limited historical records. By dawn, he had filled pages with notes. Scientifically, he couldn't explain his dream's accuracy or the strange sense of connection to a doctor who had lived and died a century before he was born. But as an epidemiologist who studied patterns, he couldn't ignore the evidence either. Something unprecedented was happening. Whatever it was, Michael sensed it was just beginning.